Hello and welcome to my podcast, The Northwood Diaries. I am your host, Spiritual Gina. I encourage you to live from your soul. This podcast is all things that involve spiritual evolution and embodiment from a trauma-informed perspective. And of course, I have powerful one-to-ones to help you on your journey, and also self-paced materials about the chakras and tarot. The description box down below has everything you need to know about those two services. Now, hopping into today's topic, which will be about victim consciousness, empaths, and emotionally underdeveloped people. Super excited to talk about this because these are often topics that are polarizing in the spiritual community. And so we have a baseline definition of all words used. What is victim consciousness? It is a paradigm that removes the self from sovereignty and creation. What are empaths? Empaths are commonly known as people that absorb other people's energies, often negative. And what is an emotionally underdeveloped person? Those that lack depth of emotional awareness. So we know what IQ is, which is intellectual quotient, And so basically it's EQ, emotional quotient, all right? And so hopping into this, I have a bone to pick with people that demonize or talk about victim consciousness as if there aren't real victims in the world, basically. And I have a bone to pick because I believe that you can be a victim without victimhood mentality, and that this is true sovereignty that honors suffering as a part of the current human paradigm. I believe that suffering is a universal experience, and it is an archetype of energy that we are here to transmute. And even Buddha kind of, the whole thing about Buddhism is that suffering is impossible to not encounter, or something like that. I haven't really studied Buddhism in its entirety, but I know that the Buddha was very clear about suffering. And so I feel that in the spiritual community, in order to embrace sovereignty, we can want to muffle out or cover up the archetype of victim consciousness, of being a victim. But it's kind of like, I hate this word, but it's kind of like a form of gaslighting, in that it acts like one part of reality isn't true in favor of another part of reality. But really, the fact that we are victims and that also that we are sovereign can exist in the same space, and both can be true. Because there are moments of life that we are extremely vulnerable, and this is especially in the mother's womb from ages 0 to 7 as well, and others can use their developed will and force to harm us versus helping us. And so I feel that the victim commentary in the spiritual space people don't like being victims, but being a victim is part of this current version of reality. And so it's like we don't want to acknowledge it. We want to only acknowledge the fact that we are sovereign creators. But again, both can be true. And I feel that when we honor the victim consciousness, not victim mentality, which is the perpetuation of cycles of victimhood, that's completely different. But when we honor victim consciousness, we are given agency and the ability to transmute it into sovereignty. And I know, especially in the Black community, there are a lot of victims. And it's when you have an eye for it, you can like see it on strangers, which is crazy and kind of invasive, honestly. But when you see it, you can see it, you know? And it's just honoring that experience that is obviously trapped in the soma, the body. And so, yeah, I feel that these emotions of victim consciousness must be addressed to be healed. And of course, we can't turn a blind eye and blame the victim. And I feel, especially in the manifestation space, this is very popular, the idea that you manifested your circumstances and therefore, you know, you can't be a victim of it. But it's just like so much of what we manifest, I feel, comes down to our past relatives' experiences and how they stored and processed those energies. And oftentimes, more than not, they don't process it, you know. It's just sitting there festering, and it's an open wound essentially that they learn to live with. And so it's just, I want us to be able to honor the fact that sometimes in life we are victims, and that doesn't mean that we're giving into victim mentality. That means that we are able to rise above it. Like even in Richard Rudd's Gene Keys, there's Gate 55, which is the shadow of victimhood. And then the gift is freedom, the city is freedom. And so even that Gene Key, it's like so impersonal, and it doesn't honor the archetype of the victim. And we have to understand that we are here to experience everything. And even though I do feel to some degree it is an inversion, this is where we are at collectively as humanity. Like, and so we can all be on different stages of victimhoodness, but collectively we are still in that inverted space. And so I feel that it's more about healing the archetype of being a victim versus dehumanizing it and calling it bad. So there's the Gene Keys that does this in its own way, but I feel especially in the manifestation space, and especially in the space where they want to be sovereign creators of their lives. And yeah, that's a long time to get out, guys. A long time. That was like my 5th take of that, so I'm happy that it came out. And so yeah, I do feel that it's somewhat of a fine line, victim mentality versus victim consciousness. But I think the main difference is that one is active participation in being a victim, like saying things like saying things or thinking things or saying things or thinking that, well, nothing ever works out for me, or it's always going to be this way. It's like this perpetuation of the cycle of victimhood versus like processing the emotions that come from those situations in order to release it from the body, but also to transmute it as well. Alchemy, basically. And really everything is healed through a certain amount of ownership. And so I know, especially for me, the ownership portion can be hard, especially when it comes to relatives. I feel that it's not my job to heal my ancestors, my relatives, but at the same time, I have to take accountability for how I have perpetuated that energy, and how I have, whether it's conscious or unconscious, mainly unconscious, of course, and how I don't want to bring that forward, basically. So it's like this weird like dance we do with victim consciousness, because it is a part of the collective experience. Suffering as a part of the collective experience, at least in its paradigm. But then of course you want to be able to bring new codes of existence onto earth. And so it's this delicate dance, and it can be a lot to process. But the main thing is not victim blaming. You didn't manifest certain things that were highly unfavorable, right? That it represented a pattern in your lineage, most likely, that we are here to transmute. And so that's the biggest thing I want to drive home about that. So yeah, that was my little spout about victimhood, victim consciousness, and victim mentality, and how they're all connected, and how we can begin to alchemize that energy. And so, God, we are on to my next favorite topic, which is about empaths. Now, people online hate empaths. And I say this because many people have different interpretations of what it means to be an empath. And they're like, oh, it's just the mirror neurons in your head that's science-based. And then other people say, oh my god, it's just your childhood and how you learn to attune to your parents' energy. And when people say those things, honestly, it so does upset me, because I'm like, you don't think if I could just turn it off, I would turn it off, I would say that recently I have begun to identify as an empath. But even with that, I want to be sure that I'm not making excuses about me picking up people's energies. But even in that, I have to be sure that I give myself grace and space, because I really do believe that some people, some souls, are just more sensitive to others. More sensitive than others, excuse me. And so a part of it definitely is about childhood, and about how experiences have shaped us, our parents' emotions have shaped us. But I truly believe that there are environmental factors, but then there are intrinsic factors. And so it's a quality of the soul. And really, to be an empath, it is those that can experience a non-dual relationship with others. We are in our dual bodies, but we are in the energetic non-dual experiences with others. Okay, so this simply means that we can feel more of the web of life that underpins all of existence. And that just means we are more sensitive than others. And so usually I do feel that wounded childhood experiences can influence this gift, but we also have to understand that we were not raised knowing how to manage this sensitivity. And so it's okay, we don't have the tools to know how to not feel everything. And so I do believe that healing childhood wounds is a big way to manage your empathy, manage being an empath. But I am a firm believer that this is a quality of the spirit, of the soul, being sensitive, and it's not something that makes you broken. It's not something that you have to fix, and that it is simply because we were not taught as a child how to properly manage this gift. And so usually I feel that being an empath is a sign of an evolved soul, or of souls meant to witness and evolve their current bloodlines. And so it's basically the universe's way of cleansing certain energetic patterns that are destructive. And so the biggest thing I've seen about being an empath is either kind of being in the victim mentality, the shadow of the victim archetype, where it's all happening to me, I can't control it. And I've definitely been there, and I'm still continuing to create this space in my body to like allow the energies to flow through me and out of me, but also like to like cut it off, you know. And then there's people that think they're empaths, but I'm like, there is no way that you could be an empath. And those individuals are, I think, the more interesting ones, because I'm like, you don't have any self-reflection skills, and yet you really believe that you are an empath. It's very interesting to witness. I've come across a couple of those. And so this kind of segues into the topic of emotionally underdeveloped people and how they have this victim mentality, and then they also think that they're empathic. And emotionally underdeveloped people are like a beast of their own, because it's basically like being stunted emotionally from at a very young age and not having the capacity or reflection skills to process and transmute emotions. And so yeah, it's a very emotionally underdeveloped people are, I think, what we consider to be the narcissists, the unfeeling mothers, the like tuned out people in our society. And they're just, I think they are the beasts to deal with, essentially. Very much people that are inverted in their energy fields and basically unable to call in and sustain the higher codes of evolution that we so desperately need as humanity. And so although these topics may seem like different in nature, I believe that the emotionally underdeveloped people are going to be more so in the victim mentality, and they also could be, you know, super sensitive. But I don't know, I don't feel that they are empaths, because I feel that in order to be an empath, you do have to be emotionally developed and more oriented towards the stream of consciousness that wants evolution for self and for humanity at large. And so yeah, that is kind of where this ends. This one was a little bit more different than I think my other podcasts, but I just wanted to talk about this to document that there's a difference between victimhood, victim conscious, well, not difference, but I wanted to document these words that we can commonly use and to give them definition and my perspectives around them. So I want to thank you so much for watching this episode, or listening to this episode of the Northfoot Diaries. And of course, I will be back. Thank you. Bless.